Welcome to Milestone Moments, the show where we explore the journeys that lead to success. I'm Sheila Slick, your host and founder of 5 Milestones. In every episode, we will bring you insights from the minds of entrepreneurs, leaders, and experts who will share not just their expertise, but the milestone moments that have reshaped their journeys and led to significant achievements. So if you're looking for motivation, you're in the right place. Subscribe now and discover the milestones that mark the path to success. Welcome to another episode of Milestone Moments in Business and Leadership. I'm your host, Sheila Slick, and today my special guest is John Follis. John co-founded one of the most successful ad agencies on Madison Avenue. He was also a podcast pioneer with his marketing show back in 2006. And for his breakthrough public service ad work, he was honored at the White House. As a thought leader, he's written for Adweek and has been a speaker at venues including the World Business Academy and Yale Entrepreneur Institute. And here's the thing. John was also fired 4 times. And today, as a sought-after podcast guest, he shares his knowledge and his career journey with people from around the world. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Sheila. Happy to be on your show. Nice to meet you.
And nice to meet you. And you had me at, I got fired 4 times. So with today's times when a lot of people are fearing getting fired or, AI is coming after my job, I want to start with that focus.
Okay.
How do you get fired 4 times? What was that journey like?
So, as you said in the introductory bio about my career was spent in the advertising business. 25 years of which, actually about 35 years in New York City. The first 10 years of my career, I worked for major ad agencies. Prior to New York, I worked in Chicago for 3 years. And when you work at a big ad agency, it actually doesn't take a lot to get fired. There's kind of a saying in the ad business, which is kind of funny, and it goes like this, that you can't be any good if you haven't been fired at least once. And I think that was mainly directed toward creative people because if a big agency loses a piece of business, the first thing they're going to do is cut staff. So it may have nothing to do with your talent or lack of talent. They just have to cut overhead. So you're vulnerable. In my case, 2 of the 4 times I got fired, I was brought in by a guy that I was supposed to be working with, who only after 3 or 4 weeks of bringing me into the agency, found a better job and left the agency. So without that guy at that agency who hired me, who brought me in, who wanted me to be there, without him being there, I was very vulnerable to office politics. I don't know if you've ever worked for a big corporation, but in any major corporation, you're going to get a lot of politics. And then when you talk about New York City and the advertising business, very, very political. A lot of big egos. And if you don't have someone at that company who's covering your back and wanting you to be successful, there's a good chance you're going to eventually lose your job. So that happened to me twice. And then, the 2 more other times, I have to say this also, Sheila, my personality did not fit well with the kind of corporate mentality. I didn't realize it at the time because it was early on in my career, but I came from a family of entrepreneurs, and it was very hard for me to kind of deal with a lot that I saw going on at these big companies. I remember a couple of times I had a hard time. You really have to be careful what you say and who you say it to. And one of the agencies I got fired from, I opened my mouth in a meeting and said something that I should not have said, and I don't think that helped my future at that agency. So again, I think my DNA is as an entrepreneur. I just didn't realize it at the time because it was very early in my career, and I was just trying to do my best to do well at these companies that hired me. But I realized after getting fired and taking an entrepreneurial path that that was really uh, my destiny. That was really what I was meant to be doing.
So, before I move on to the next question, what was the biggest life lesson that perhaps you can share? Someone that may be fired or may be fearing fire. What was that life lesson? And I think it's going to be a good one because I know my listeners can't see what I'm seeing, but there's a lot of success behind you because I don't know that
Yeah.
you can fit another trophy or award behind you.
Well, every time you lose your job, you have to look at it instead of a big negative, which certainly no one wants to get fired. You don't want to have someone tell you that we're not going to pay you anymore. Good luck. But it's also an opportunity to reevaluate your career path. And every time I lost my job, that's what I did. I had to make a decision on what my next step was going to be. And the first time in my case, the first time I get fired, I just wanted to get back on the horse, get another job at another agency as quickly as possible. But when this starts becoming a pattern, as it did in my case, I mean, I didn't just get fired 4 times, Sheila. I got fired 4 times in 8 years. So so if you do the math, it's like every other job I got fired from. I had 7 jobs in those 8 years. So I got fired from most of the jobs that I had. And at a certain point in my case, maybe after the second or third time, I was forced to try to understand what was going on. And I wasn't sure because it's hard to have perspective when you're that young. You're just starting out. You're only working in the business 5 or 6, 7 years. Now it's easy to see. I didn't do well in the corporate environment because corporate environments, one thing, if you've worked in any of them, you'll realize that there are a lot of people in senior positions um, that aren't that smart and aren't that talented, but pretty much in every case, they know how to navigate the office politics to get to where they are. And that's one of the things I was beginning to realize that I was not good at politics. I didn't really want to try to focus my energy to try to be good at politics. I was a creative guy, a writer, and an art director. That was my skill set. And I didn't want to have to suddenly switch gears and learn how to be a good politician so I could move up in a corporate environment. I just decided that my focus needed to be to find a company that was more interested in my creative talent and how I could solve their marketing and advertising problems for their clients creatively. So I just a big shift for me was when I started shifting my focus from these big political agencies, these big corporations, and try to find smaller agencies that just needed someone to come in on a freelance basis and be a hired gun and basically work. Sometimes it was a couple of months, sometimes it was just a couple of days, but just to come in to solve a creative problem. And once I made that decision and kind of shift my focus and started getting freelance gigs at some smaller agencies, was when my career started going in a very positive direction.
It flourished. So that has even led you to receive or be honored at the White House and at the United Nations. Can you tell me about that?
So as a result of the success that I started having when I was working as a hired gun doing freelance, I worked on one campaign that was an extremely high profile, successful campaign in New York. The dream for any creative person is to be associated with a campaign that people know about, that they like, that creates a buzz. So that happened to me about a year after I started freelancing. I got involved with a campaign that everyone was talking about, and that caught the attention of a business guy who called me out of the blue because he was looking for a creative guy. This was a business development guy who had also worked at big agencies, not had a lot of success, and was trying to find a creative guy that he could collaborate with so the two of us could pitch business on our own and try to build our own agency, essentially. So as a result of this very successful campaign, he called me up. We started a conversation. We started collaborating. And very quickly, we started becoming successful because I was really good at the creative. He was really good at getting meetings and talking to clients. And that combination where we complemented each other enabled us to almost immediately start winning business and become successful. Now, you asked me about getting invited to the White House. So getting invited to the White House came out of the agency that he and I eventually started. What was great about this guy, this partner, was that if I came up with a great idea for anything and he was excited about the idea, he would just try to find a client for the idea. That's not the way it normally works. Usually you find a client, you discuss them, you find out what their business and marketing goals are, and then accordingly you move forward and you show them some ads for whatever problem it is they're trying to solve. In this case, I came up with a child abuse ad on my own. I was watching TV one night, and there's a documentary on Adolf Hitler, and during the documentary, the show mentioned that Adolf Hitler was abused as a child from his father, and I thought, wow, that's an interesting fact. Let me see if I could turn that into an ad for child abuse prevention. So I came up with an ad. It featured Hitler in the ad. I showed it to my partner. We contacted the National Organization for Child Abuse Prevention, who was working out a deal with the NBA, the National Basketball Association, that was going to give them $5 million worth of their TV media time to run some TV commercials during the NBA playoffs. A lot of major sports organizations will team up with some nonprofit organizations just because they think it's good PR for them, whether it's Stay in School or child abuse prevention or any cause. If you notice the NFL, NBA, they're always aligning themselves with these kind of organizations. So we happened to be at the right time, at the right place, while they had just been given this deal, $5 million worth of TV time, and they needed an agency to do some TV commercials, public service announcements against child abuse that were going to be running during the playoffs. And this is when Michael Jordan for the Bulls was going up against Magic Johnson and the Lakers, or early 90s. So that year, 24 million people watched the NBA playoffs. And I had 3 commercials that I came up with that ran during the playoffs. And about, I don't know, almost immediately after the commercial started running, because $5 million, Sheila, in the playoffs were maybe 3-4 weeks. And we're talking 1991 media dollars. So that would be probably $10 million now. You spend that kind of money in a 3 or 4 week period, those commercials ran like crazy every game. So everyone who was watching basketball was seeing them. And apparently one of the people that was watching the playoffs that year was the president of the United States. It was George Bush. Because about a month after the playoffs ended, I got a letter from the White House. I thought it was a joke. It was not an election year. It was like June, I think, whenever the playoffs were over. So they weren't asking me for a campaign contribution. I thought it was a joke. I opened it up. It was a very fancy invitation to a White House reception to be one of a couple of dozen people from around the United States who had contributed their time and talent for a public service cause, and that's how I got invited to the White House. And then, after that invitation, about a month after that, the original ad that I came up with featuring Hitler that the organization did not want to touch, they didn't want to run an ad featuring Hitler. We found another organization in Albany, New York. There was another chapter of the child abuse organization, who was more than happy to run the ad as a newspaper ad. And the ad ran. They started getting all kinds of calls from psychologists, guidance counselors, everyone who was like really blown away from this ad associating Hitler and child abuse, because it was a very, very powerful message against child abuse prevention. We entered the ad in award shows, and somehow it got on the radar of the United Nations, who at the time had just started something they called the United Nations Public Service Award. I think it was the first year that they decided to do that. So they were looking to acknowledge people around the country who were doing great things that allied with the mission of the United Nations, which is everyone get along in peace and, a better world, essentially. And someone at the UN apparently came across this ad because a month after I got invited to the White House, I got another letter from the United Nations telling me that I was one of the first recipients for this UN Public Service Award, and, come to United Nations where you could get your award. So fortunately, our office was about 20 blocks from the United Nations. So all I needed to do was get on my bicycle instead of, jump on a plane to go to the United Nations. So I went to the UN to get my UN award that year. So it was a pretty big year for me.
As an entrepreneur, I think that my favorite part of the story is thinking that I don't know that you would have had those opportunities had you not been fired, if we go back from the beginning, because
Right.
you had that liberty, that flexibility, the power to make your own decisions and think outside of the box, right? Because as you're saying all this, I'm like, these awards over an ad about Hitler and child abuse. It makes
Right.
me want to say, well, what was the ad? I want to learn more because it just sounds so, you know,
Provocative.
and strange. Like my mind can't put the pieces together. So I guess that's how you create impact when you're in advertising.
Well, the tagline I came up with is, which I started with, the message I wanted to point out when I used Hitler is that if you look at a lot of child abuse messages, it always shows like a little kid with a bruise on their face sitting in the corner with a Raggedy Ann doll who, was abused by some adult, right? The idea behind this Hitler ad was, this is an issue that affects all of us, whether or not you may be the best parent in the world, right? Or maybe you don't even have kids, but because in Hitler's case, he was an abused child that did not get the help that he needed, and all of his emotional and psychological issues related to the abuse that he had growing up ended up turning into the monster that he became. And this is why this is an issue that everyone needs to reckon with, because it wasn't just Hitler. If you look at the history of a lot of famous criminals and people like Hitler, Charles Manson, for example. Do you know who Charles Manson is?
Of course.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, some of the people listening who are under 40 may not know. So Charles Manson, one of the most famous murderers in U.S. history. He was abused as a kid. And, pretty much if you look at any major criminal and are able to find out about their history, not in every case, but in many cases, they were abused as kids. So that was the message. And the tagline was child abuse, it hurts all of us, was the tagline. So when I showed this ad, I featured Hitler, Charles Manson, Lee Harvey Oswald, who assassinated John Kennedy, who was very famous for people who are baby boomers, at least, very famous. They know what he looks like. And Mussolini also. Again, I'm dating myself, but famous murderers and insane people, basically. And the headline was, "Some abused children grow up to become famous." That was the headline, which is something that listen, you could have the great headline. If you don't get people to read the copy in the ad, it's not gonna work. So the reason I wanted to have that headline to kind of raise eyebrows is because I wanted them to read the copy. And when you say some abused children grow up to become famous, and you show Hitler and Mussolini, you want to understand what the copy is. And the copy just said, the fact of the matter is that 80% of criminals in our prisons were abused as kids. So were the 4 people pictured in this ad. Not doesn't mean that every abused kid turns into a criminal, but 80% of the people in prison were abused as kids. So this is a problem that affects all of us. And here's an 800 number if you'd like to get more information, or if you know any people or kids that are being abused, please call this number. So that was the gist of the ad.
Wow. So now let's fast forward to today. What are you focusing on? We had mentioned that you're sharing knowledge and you're in podcasts. Where's your passion at today?
Well, people can't see me, but I'm old. So I'm 71. So it was probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago that I looked at my net worth and my financial situation, realized that if I didn't want to, I didn't need to continue hustling for clients and hustling for work. I could pretty much focus on anything I wanted to do. And one of the things I enjoy doing is this. I love giving back. I love sharing my stories and hopefully some wisdom that I've gained in the years that I've been working as an entrepreneur. So I've been at this point, Sheila, close to 100 podcasts I've done in the past several years. As we talked about earlier, I was also a volunteer for SCORE, the organization for retired executives. So now I like continue. I mean, basically, this is what I've done throughout my career, is try to find time to work for public service organizations and causes that I'm passionate about. Just now that I have the time, I could devote a lot more time to it than I was able to when I was working full time. So that's one of the things I enjoy doing now.
It's leaving your legacy.
Yeah, for sure.
So what do you want to be remembered for?
Well, it would be nice to be remembered for some of the what we're talking about now, some of the work that I've done for these very worthy organizations. I mean, I just mentioned child abuse, but over the course of my career, I probably worked on 3 dozen, was involved with 3 dozen various causes and nonprofit organizations. Child abuse just happened to be one of them. So I think that's a pretty good legacy to leave, as well as these podcasts that I'm now sharing. And as I mentioned, just sharing my wisdom and knowledge about marketing. I mean, you're asking me a lot of questions about my career, but a lot of the podcasts I've been on focus specifically on marketing and how business owners can do a better job of marketing their business. So that's just another legacy I've left, helping business owners be successful.
So I'm definitely sticking out as one of those podcasts you're going to remember, because I asked you different questions. And I absolutely loved your story. You inspired me from the moment that you said, I got fired 4 times and it could have been 30 years ago, because I love these stories that have such meaning at the end and they provide hope. And so you're providing hope to anyone that perhaps today isn't happy in their career,
Yeah.
or perhaps is fearing getting fired, or, their job is going to get taken away by AI. And as a score mentor as well, I've always looked for the opportunity, because that really is the entrepreneurial mindset. If you want to start something, you need a need, you got to solve a problem. And so, what a better way, to find a solution to a problem than when you're facing it yourself. So, I think that by switching that mindset, you can end up living a much brighter life, making a bigger impact in the world when you have that freedom, like you did, your creativity just unleashed, and look at where you're at. And if we had more time, we'd go over each and every one of the awards. Maybe I'll even share if you want a piece of the video, because you've obviously impacted a lot of organizations and had a lot of impressive campaigns throughout your career, perhaps even a day.
Well, thank you, Sheila. Appreciate that. But you're right. I mean, I think that's, at the time, it wasn't really something I wanted to talk a lot about getting fired. That's not a good way to brand yourself, when you're still, got to the point, Sheila, where when I was meeting with recruiters to try to get a new job, uh, you have to be honest with them, and that's not a great selling point to say that you've been fired multiple times. It got to the point where recruiters weren't even interested in talking to me. I had to figure things out on my own. But now that I don't have to worry about it, that's, I think, one of the reasons I get on all these podcasts, because not just the fact that I got fired 4 times, but the fact that it was only after, as you just said, only after getting fired all those times, that all the success happened to me in my career, getting invited, honored to at the White House and the UN, and starting an ad agency that became one of the most award-winning agencies in the country. All of that happened after getting fired that 4th time. So now that's a great hook to get me on some podcasts and talk about it.
It does, and it gives, other generations like Gen Z that's growing up in a whole different age. When we're talking about TV ads, I don't even know that they watch TV today, right? So I love so many different aspects of the story, but I absolutely love that. And it also makes you different. And I think with maturity, right? I'm not a spring chicken. You end up being more comfortable with yourself and, being different and standing out. When we were talking before, I said, yeah, no, I did program. A lot of people look at me like, well, huh? And at first I took it the wrong way. Like, I don't look like a programmer. I'm a mom. I've got these 3 kids. But then I ended up embracing that. That difference helped me stand out. And so I love your story. You have me. That was the best hook. And
Let me
just
just say
like,
one last thing, Sheila, because I think this is really an important thing for your listeners to know about. Um, Once I went on my, even when I was in my agency with a business partner, um, even though we were entrepreneurs, um, I couldn't do whatever I wanted. I still had a partner that I had to work with, and not all the time we didn't agree on a lot of things. I couldn't kind of go in whatever direction I wanted. For example, again, I'm dating myself. I was very interested in the internet. He wasn't. And so, we only worked together for about 3.5, 4 years. Eventually I came to the decision that, he was holding me back. And it was a hard decision because we were very successful, and I didn't have any false illusions that I could continue to be successful without someone who was such a great new business guy. But I had to take a chance because things weren't working out, and I went on my own. But this was right at the time where the internet was becoming a thing. And my first website went up in late 95. And I wasn't a technology guy. But once my website went up, I had some coders code the thing. And this is before they were templates and WordPress and Wix and all that stuff. Everything was, the old days, custom coded. You can appreciate that. And so once the website went up, then I realized, well, if I want to change anything on the website, I've got to learn how to go on in the back end of this website and figure out, understand coding and know where I need to go if I want to change a couple of sentences or change a word here and there. So I started learning how to code in the mid 90s or late 96, 97, just so I could continue modifying my website moving forward. So, and then when podcasting became a thing in 2005, I was intrigued with that. And I was so intrigued that I started learning about podcasting. And by February 2006, I had my own podcast. It was called The Marketing Show. You know, a lot of people who went through COVID just discovered what podcasting was, just not that long ago. Podcasting has been around for 20 years. And the point I'm trying to make, point I'm trying to make is that in order to be successful, you have to continue pursuing your curiosity, continue looking at trends. Right now, if I was active, I would be all over AI. I wouldn't ignore it. I would know everything about it because that's the future. It's not going away. And I think it's really important. I don't think I would have continued to be. After I walked away from my partnership, I was on my own for about 25 years, basically without a business partner, doing my own thing. I didn't know I could be successful because I don't have a business background. But one of the things that enabled me to continue to be successful is what I'm talking about now, to continue to be an early adapter to some of the trends that you can see coming down the road and know everything about it. Because if you don't, your competitors will. And that's where you'll lose out to your competitors because they're engaged in it earlier than you are. So you've got to really be able to be aware of the coming trends and know everything about them, so you can brand yourself as an expert in all the things that are coming down the road. So that, and I think it's an important message for all of your listeners to hear, that you have to constantly evolve your business model, as I did.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sheila. My pleasure. Great, good listen. Good luck with your podcast.
Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Milestone Moments in Business and Leadership. I will leave all of John's contact information so that you can follow his journey in the show notes. Until next time.